All right, Healthy Dialogue members. Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Steve Harvey. Welcome back to another episode of Healthy Dialogue. It's podcast 29. We're progressing your identity today. Today we got on the left-hand side the Harada family, the Spence Mama, representing the team. Come on up here, Spence Mama. Wow, thanks for having me, Steve Harvey. And on the other side, we got the Weezer family, Carl Weezer. Represented, we got Carl. Hi, guys. I'm so happy to be here. All right, now that the cringe is over, we on for today's podcast. I guess before we even get into our topic for today, I guess I'll give you guys a life update. Just finished my fall quarter. Went all right. Now I can spend time again just like focusing on work, and then also there's some upcoming games that I'm getting hyped over about. So yeah, it's a great time to be alive right now. What else? Oh, we got family coming up to the household. It's gonna be a good time, I think. I mean, I don't usually interact with family, but yeah, I don't know. I'd rather be here. I feel like with family, I'm a little distant. I don't think there's too much for me to talk about with most of my family members, and if there is, it's not anything like that I find necessarily substantial either. I think it ends up just being a bunch of chit chat like that I don't really care for, but it's more like I don't really care for that kind of chit chat with anyone anyways. So I try to stick to what's meaningful to me, and usually that hurts people's feelings sometimes. But alas, I'm being antisocial for the choice of being antisocial rather than I don't have the capacity to be social with people who are different from me. Makes me an asshole. It's just kind of strange. I was never like an asshole in the past. Maybe I need to work on that. It's a past identity of mine, which is fitting because today's topic is going to be progressing your identity. Part of the reason why, or actually a lot of the reasons why this topic is being brought up currently is because I have a couple people who have, and myself included, who have been hung over like a past identity that we've like all had, and I think that binds us from progressing ourselves further along to who we can be. And sometimes I think it's also hard for some people to be taking a look into the future and seeing who they want to be, and then taking a look at themselves where they are presently and being discouraged by the lack of progression that happens between you and the ideal you. So in some ways, this is also like a depression talk in the way that I view depression. But I know for other people, they're also binded by like a past identity, and I don't know. It's discouraging to not be who you can be. I think some people struggle with that, as well as part of the progressing your identity part is knowing how to invest in yourself to be the person that you know you can be as well. So, and that's like a whole process in itself. So I imagine for today, we're probably just going to go through the outline. This is like one of the first times in a while where I've had an outline where I knew what I wanted to say. Like usually I generate outlines, or like I would say a lot of the first 25 episodes that we've had here have been outlines that I've generated because there's a certain flow that I want to go with the dialogue, which isn't necessarily the greatest thing all the time because, well, now I just have a standard where if I have an outline of what I want to say, then it usually, like the podcast itself, the podcast content usually goes a lot better. But when I don't have like a topic or an outline, or usually the outline is reflective of the topic that I'm passionate about. And if I have a poor outline or not like an outline at all, then I don't usually have passion when it comes to the podcast material. And I think that really reflects on how the content ends up turning out. So I think it's this. I'm just saying this is going to be one of the podcasts where we have like some structure to it, and I think the flow will generally go better for a better listening experience as well. I do have Isabel in here. I didn't know if she's currently listening. I don't know if she wants to participate. She's probably seen the outline, I imagine. I think she might also want to talk on it or not. Up to her, or she could be busy, or might just want to listen instead. If she wants to join in, you can. Otherwise, I'm just going to go with it. Okay, so with progressing your identity, I think I've already spoken to this, or to this point already, but as I said before, with like the depression portion, when it came to my own personal, I guess, depression story from years ago, part of the depression was knowing that before I was a better person than who I currently was. So it was depressing to know that I've downgraded from like a status that I saw myself in a better light in, and then I was not achieving the same status as I was before. And I think if you're downgrading yourself, like the backtracking on progression is like definitely not a good thing. I was like eating pretty unhealthily, but I mean I was always doing that, but I gained a lot of weight from like high school, like starting college, and a lot of that was I never took the time to develop like good eating habits. And part of that was like I was a swimmer, so most of the calories that I had intaked, which was a lot actually, I love to eat, was usually burned off. And being a competitive swimmer, and a long distance one at that, I was swimming countless miles in the pool like almost every day. So, but yeah, like not having the competitive swimming environment anymore after entering college, I had no way to lose the calories that I was intaking. So, but like the food intaking was still the same. It was a rough time. But yeah, having that comparison back then was definitely a part of like the depression portion of it, because not only did I not feel good, it was knowing that like the opportunity of choosing to make the responsible decision to start exercising like in college, I just didn't take it. And that's just nothing's worse than knowing that you should have done something when you didn't do it, or knowing that you should have done something when the opportunity was there. And that's pretty discouraging. But yeah, and sometimes when you're looking back on that decision too, which I think is also like reminiscing on getting hung over your past self, a part of that is it's definitely related to feeling uninspired by like, I guess, you. And I think moving on from having a depressing past is to forgive yourself of the poor actions that you've done in the past. That's at least how I've managed to move on from knowing like all these identities that I've had in, like before. For example, like I used to do stupid shit in high school. I was a pretty horny piece of shit kid, even though I was innocent. But, you know, a lot of people chose to involve themselves with the act of like sexual activity. For me, I was like a foot guy, you know, not too huge about boobs or whatnot, boobs and butts. But as like a foot guy, you know, it's pretty harmless. It's pretty harmless in comparison. So I don't know. It's just like a visual thing. It used to be like a touching thing too, but I don't know. I've done some pretty cringy shit as like that awkward foot guy though. Cringy shit as in like openly asking. But I think everyone lets their like horny side get the best of them at some points in time, and maybe it hurts others in a way that you didn't intend it to hurt them, or came off more creepy than you expected. I don't know. There's no good way to like solve that problem. And it's really harmful because depending on the perception of how the person takes your request really determines the kind of reputation that they have control of over your they actually have control over your reputation depending on like how you asked or how they perceived your request, which is kind of sad. So that's why I feel like that's like another thing too. I feel like it's not uncommon for women like to say men aren't as like alpha anymore to like not ask people out. But there's always like there's now like a social fear, especially with the age of new technology too. There's a social fear that your social reputation is going to get hit so hard that it affects other places in your life that you didn't want it to. Isabel does have a listener thought. If you look back and who you used to be, what you did, and you cringe, it's a very simple sign of growth that I've personally overlooked. That cringe indicates who you are now. Wouldn't approve of repeat that again. And I do agree with that. I think if you're able to part of my experience is when I look back at my past self, if I'm still cringing at it, that means that I have like some sense of insecurity over that identity that I've had in the past because it has some correlation to who I am today. And I think a good indication of you moving on is if you can, instead of cringing at like a past action that you've done of yourself, if you're able to move on from that, it's usually through laughing. I usually laugh at myself if I do something so completely stupid or something that I just wouldn't do today. Because I don't know, who you are from like whatever timeline ago is a completely different person. You have new experiences between the time of that event from happening and today. So that progression in itself is pretty much like it's pretty. It's not suggestive. Oh my gosh. I'm forgetting the word. Subjective. There we go. Is subjective to how you define the timeline of who you were before and who you are now. If you determine that it's no different, then I think you're gonna take it to heart that you've done something wrong. But if you have like some healthy distance away from the time where you made like a really stupid decision in the time now, and you're able to, I guess, in some degree to like forgive that or even like laugh at it, find it humorous that you like third person judging a character who you were before. I think if you're able to do that, you have a really good sense of the progression between that time and now. But yeah, I've done plenty of cringe shit in in the past, and as to this day, I still think it's kind of cringe. But I can laugh at some of the things that I did in order to get the attention that I wanted, or to get like some reactions that I wanted. Uh, back then. Okay, I'll tell you about a specific story about something that I think is kind of cringe, and I kind of laugh at it. I do laugh at it, but I've moved on from the situation. So one thing that I wanted to do in high school by my senior year was to go to a sports event for every sport hosted at the high school. And so I went over to like, well, actually, that's not true. It is true. It just didn't happen. But I think for this specific case, I just wanted to go to like a couple football games. Oh wait, no, this is a completely different year. I was in my junior year, not my senior year. But Yeah, I wanted to go to a football game. And I think I've already told the story of when I sat out. I just like sat out on the side of the field and I watched the game from there instead of on the stands. But same game. I asked someone to go like come with me beforehand, and they said no. So, but the dialogue that went along with that was like I think she had asked me for like some request, or maybe it was like completely out of the blue. I can't remember, but the conversation went like this. I ended up asking if she like, oh gosh, now I actually have to think about what even happened. I think she asked me for something, and as like a response and trying to hold that request as hostage, I was like, okay, sure, only if you come to like the football game with me. Um and I don't know, I think she took it as like a date. I think I also did something kind of weird too. I think, oh god, I'm really poorly explaining this story. You know what? I'm gonna table it for now because I thought it had some correlation, but maybe not. Anyways, like I think I said something really obscure. It's like I think I tried to make it sound like a date when it really wasn't. I think I just wanted to ask her to go to like the football game, and it just came out really weird and in like a really creepy way. So, do I regret the situation? I don't really know. It's like a communication mix. It just sucks that I was branded as someone who like kind of looked creepy in the way that I asked for that, because it ended up like looking like a date, but I just wanted companionship at a football game. So, yeah, is what it is. But that's like a kind of moment where you just look back and you're like, well, shit, that happened, and it sucks. Someone thinks of me as like some creep now, but um, hey, man, you can't control the universe in the way that you want it to be controlled. As much as you'd rather not have that experience happen, at least you know now that the strategy that I did before wasn't very useful. So, moving on, and just knowing that you've learned the experience from the experience to make sure that you can, I don't know, if you want to have the same interaction happen again, you just do it again. If you don't, then you have to come up with a more creative way to ask someone to a football game for the companionship. So, anyways, I think for a long time I was pretty uninspired by that event too. Like the collection of experiences that you look upon from yourself can be uninspiring at like a time when you don't have like a healthy distinguishing um, character from who you were before. If you start believing that who you were before is identical to who you are now, or like you've made no changes since that time, then I think you can start being or that I think the uninspiring mindset will come and will start dominating you in a way that you don't want it to be dominating your mind, your mental space. Uh, so the next point that I have is identity is ever changing, and the idea behind that is I think it's not only true that your identity is ever changing, even if you want to believe that it's not. I think there's always, like, even if you stay in the same cycle of behaviors, I think your identity is partially changing, and due to that, I think the more you stay in a specific character, the more you understand that this character is perhaps either meant for you or not meant for you. You get different experiences while you're being that character in particular. And if you start discovering that that's who you want to be as time goes on, then I think that's solidified your resolve to be the character who you are currently playing. And I think if you're suffering through that character that you're playing, then I think you're building up resolve to change to be someone else. And so I think identity is also like also encapsulating the mindset that you have of the character that you're currently playing as well. So I think identity is not only just the act, but your thoughts behind the act as well. Who dictates your identity? I mean, of course, yourself. You're the one who's like putting on the act or the character, and whether or not it's like you just being you or you trying to be someone else who you don't want to be. It's really up to your choice. At any point in time, you can just turn on a switch and say, I want to start. I want to start playing a different character. Sure. That's entirely up to you. There's others who also who like dictate your identity to some degree. I think a perceptual identity is really external, um, which is hard because sometimes if you have that external expectation to play a certain role or a certain character, then you start influencing that on who you should be internally. And I think to some degree, I think that's how you get people to get peer pressured into roles that they don't want to be a part of, or rather conflict their own internal wants with who they want to be with someone else who wants you to be something who you don't want to be. So I think having that conflict isn't equally helpful towards your character and action in total your whole mental space. Social media branding, it's kind of weird though. This doesn't apply to everyone, but you get like celebrities, right? And then you also get like politicians, whatever. Um, I think you could have multiple identities in the way that you want to have multiple identities. You can have like a social, like to a certain group of people, say on like social media, you can be like a content creator. Like I'm a TikTok star, whatever. But to like your family, you're completely different. To yourself, you're completely different. To friends, you're completely different. It's like there's certain roles that you have to adjust to your core character in order to best interact with the different contexts. But as like a TikTok star, you might have like a certain persona that may like drain you in a way. I've heard some people talk, some content creators talk, like on Twitch, saying that whenever they're live, they have to play like a certain identity, which is completely different from who they are. And I think they get a huge mix of not understanding who their identity is, um, because they're so conflicted with their work, which is content creation, and they put on this persona that they don't really define as them. And it's not even for fun anymore because it's like your job is now dependent upon this identity in itself. You gain money through the character you portray, and that's the content. And then there's also like their core self, which is like other aspects of their identity that they keep concealed from the public. So I think the more roles you play, the harder it is to keep track of your own identity and trying to manage all the different ones that you have to keep forward. There's also the law. So, there's felons, worst kinds of felons, terrorists, you know. Now, I don't, I'm just going to say, if you did something bad like a long time ago, like say you murdered someone. I was listening in on a story from Dr. K and the Healthy Gamer brand. They were talking um, with some guy who murdered like a family friend at like 16. So it's like a killer, like a teen killer from like the 1980s. He's now 40. 1980s, 2000s. Oh my god, it's been. Oh my gosh, I'm 25 years old. Holy shit! Yeah, trying to keep track of like a timeline is hard now. Understanding how old I am is oh, how uninspiring is that? It's all down here from here. I'm 25 years old. I'm at the peak. of my human functionality. Doesn't get better than this. But no, he's murdered someone, and the way you look at him is just, yeah, he seems kind of off. Has he made drastic changes since he was 16? Absolutely. You know, being at 41, you just and like spending 20 years in prison. You know, it's hard to get that off your name. Everyone's just going to view you as a killer and they won't know how to interact with you. It's like an identity that everyone is putting upon you because that's the identity that you should be taking. Socially and societally, you've been branded as someone who's done nothing, who's done something like so terrible in the context of societal rules that no one can really look at you the same. It's so sad. And it's like everyone's expression and response is a reminder of your one action that you had at a different identity at like as the identity you were at 16 and now you're 41. That's so hard. It's so hard. You know, it's hard enough to not be reminded by your own self that you've done something so terrible that I'm sure he regretted. And 20 years later, he's still being reminded by it from external factors. It's both an internal and external battle. I'm sure internally he's found a way to find peace with that. But I don't know. Coming up with an external barrier for that is, I can't imagine. Anyhow, can you overcome an identity that you've been branded regardless of the way that your identity's been dictated? And internally, yes. I think you'd have to come up with a process to internally resolve the identity that you want to have for yourself. If you don't want to change, if you don't have the resolve to change your identity in the way you want to change it, then you're not. The only person who can change you is you when it comes to that. So absolutely you can do it yourself. You can do it with the help of others and take a look at the process that they do, the methods that they adopt in order to make changes for themselves. But other people want to brand you in the way that other people want to brand you. And that's pretty sad because you take a look at politics all the time and they have all these name callings of white supremacy and racists and sexist, misogynistic. There's all these like pop word keywords that are just being thrown around as adjectives to different characters out there. Can you really change that? I don't know. I mean, you can try putting on like a public appearance to combat the identity, to shift the identity to who you actually are, but people's words really ruin a reputation. They can say what they want to say. And what's unfair is that people usually go along with that. If you spit on someone's name once, I'm probably going to remember it. Like Kobe Bryant, when he died, a lot of people were saying, oh, he was such an inspiration to me when I was a kid. He's an inspiration to like all the youth out there who are interested in basketball. Then there's one person on my friends list who was talking about like the rape victims and in a way that like put Kobe Bryant in a really bad light. And you know, naturally they should have something to say for that, but that's just not the time. I think if you're combating the fact that Kobe Bryant was inspirational on a level that is unimaginable and helped so many young people and especially of minority cultures too, or of minority populations. You know, he may have done one bad thing in his life, but as did we all. And yet some people were still willing to paint him as like, thank God this rapist died. It's hard. Ugh, all right. I think we're done with that introductory portion. Um, I'm gonna talk about getting hung over your past, and as I said before, this is probably the main act that I've indulged myself with when it came to like the depression phase. Um, ugh, this is this is like the key activity. There was a specific term for. I read something up in my interpersonal communications class about getting hung up over like your past, or getting hung over like the details of your past self. Um, I totally forget the name of it. I'm not gonna look it up, but there's like a specific word for like reminiscing over like bad portions of your life. But the thought is like what the text even had to say was like, it's not good for you. So this uh, this perception of knowing that, looking at your past self and not being inspired from it is actually like proven to be a thing. What contributes to your past identity? So when I take a look at the action that I did with asking like a girl to like a football event, I considered like the thought process going into it. I consider the execution with that thought process, um, and like what I didn't do and what I should have done. You know, I think any way that I think being in the event, knowing what I was thinking during the event, and my thought process as to how to analyze that event is also all just part of the identity at the time. I think for that specific occurrence or that specific instance, I had like some romantic intention, and so I think part of that came off well. Okay, from the get go, knowing that, like the way that I was trying to play off the situation and kind of ask it as a romantic invitation, to just like a football event. I think it just didn't come off that great. The thought process was, I think the play was actually really good, and I think it could have came out a lot better. Well, okay, it could have came out. It could have came out better if like she had the same feelings back, but that wasn't the case. Execution wise, it came off like I don't think I would change. I would probably change a little bit of what I did. It probably wasn't very professional in the way that I asked for like companionship at that time. Um, but I didn't. Yeah, that also speaks to what I didn't do, and then what I should have done. I don't think I should have done anything different. I think I should stick with my character and the belief that like that interaction went the best way that it could for what I was capable of doing. But that moment in particular, I've taken a look at that instance, and I feel like I've come to very different conclusions about that situation, because before I would take a look at that and be like, you know what, Spencer? Yeah, you are a creep. You're exactly every negative perspective that other person has of you because you didn't do X, Y, and Z. And I think for a long time I actually had that perspective. And you can make any experience, you can take any experience that you've had in the past and really take it like, and really dig into the negative aspect of that experience, which is sad because that can also be a habit that you have over yourself. Say if you really want to indulge yourself in feeling feeling like shit. So you take a look at past experiences and you say, "Motherfucker, you're garbage." You know? It's exactly what I did for almost all the experiences I was trying to remember at the time. Um, you know what's weird? I was taking a look at a previous conversation I had with really old friends. And some guy in my network did something really stupid and really bad. Something that I would consider unforgivable. And it really is unforgivable. And it wasn't even towards me, it was like towards a neighbor. It had very negative impact towards it, like a neighbor of his. It was unforgivable. And for some reason, when I was looking at that conversation, I'm not a very like I don't respond with emotion now, but oh my god, I responded with emotion back then. I was kind of disgusted with myself. How could I forgive someone who did something so unforgivable? And yeah, anyways, like retrospective, that was not the right call. As much as I want to stand up for my friends, like back then, maybe at the time that was like maybe at the time that was like the best situation that I wanted to do for someone else, but oh my god. I'm just getting hung up on my past identity that I would do something like that for someone else. Even when like I don't want any association with someone who does something like that again. Isabel asks, can you change your identity in others' lives? It's hard, but it's not your responsibility. To people please everyone and convince them of your character, especially now in the social media age, would be insane to attempt and completely out of your control. What really speaks is your belief in your own character and being consistent in your actions. Even then, only a small amount of attentive, open minded people will notice that and change their opinion about you and overlook what others have branded you as. Here's my question to Isabel, and I believe everything she said is correct. I just, there's also people who try to manipulate the public opinion of like the character that you're portraying yourself as. So say if you have a hot take, right? Say if I said abortion is abortion should be illegal. And all of a sudden you have a lot of people branding me as like, a piece of shit and whatnot. Um, is that something I should try to fight if I'm branded socially? Even if like the interpretation of the idea that I presented isn't even taken in the most accurate form. It's like, how much of that public opinion should you be fighting? Especially when that reputation is going to affect you in ways that you don't want it to affect you. Because being branded as whatever name that you're being associated as with someone who believes that abortion should be illegal, how much of that should you really try and change from the public opinion? That's like my question to Isabel and perhaps to anyone else listening as well. Um, I forget the specific. Damn. You know what? I'm going to move on from that. I can't remember, or rather, I'm going to move on from what I was talking about before. If there's something that was misinterpreted about your opinion, you correct that. Everything else, if it's true to you, no need to fight it. That is what Isabel said. Well, I think it. Well, okay. Perspective wise, you guys, like, two people can disagree about how you interpret a specific action. I think it's just hard to, like, some people aren't willing to give you credit for for like an intention that you had. So say if someone isn't willing to overlook my opinion about abortion being illegal, but I respect, like, women's, like, bodies, you know. You can't have both in some people's eyes. And that's why the perspective comes up as, or rather, like, their perspective about branding you a certain way that doesn't really do you justice, isn't like met on common ground. From what I've heard, or from what I've seen, I think that's I think that's accurate. I think if you represent something in particular, you have to be painted a certain character. And people aren't willing to stray away. I mean, do I think those people are stupid? Absolutely. I think the people who can't disassociate, like, an intention and hear the full details of your intention out, along with the perspective that you have, and rather, like, brand you a specific role or a specific character in a way to, like, socially shame you because they disagree with you. I think that's a pretty common tactic that people use today. And I think it's shallow. But it also has, like, a bunch of harmful effects as much as you don't want to play the game. So that's the perspective I'll bring up to that. Keeping yourself responsible for past actions. So it's pretty okay. Knowing the distance between the time that you made a specific action at a specific time, and knowing who you are today, like, the timeline between those two people is hard to determine whether or not you are someone completely different than that person before. Example, yesterday, I don't know. Say if I did something pretty awful yesterday. So let's say I just, like, murdered someone yesterday. If I move on to tomorrow, should I really brand myself as the same murderer if, like, you know, if I didn't murder anyone today? You know, and, like, identity wise, it's hard to make the, like, it's hard to know whether or not you've grown as a person from the time that you did something terrible that was, like, identity defining, and the identity that you're defining for yourself for today. So how do you balance, like, keeping yourself responsible for things that you've done recently and things that you want to, and, like, but also finding balance between bordering yourself from that person who you were in the past? What's a good balance for that? Yeah, and part of the other outline questions is how long are they applicable to your current identity? Say if I murdered someone, in 2015, does that still make me, like, the same murderer from in 2021? If I only killed one person and I went through the fair trial process and I let the law take its toll on my character, you know, 2021, am I still the same murderer? Socially, I think so, but internally, it'd be hard to decide whether or not you've moved on from the person who was so spiteful and so negligent of someone else's human worth. Negligent wasn't the right word there. Disregarding of the worth of someone else. It's hard to tell. Can you escape those? I don't know. Depends on whether or not people are like internally, whether both parties internally and externally both have to are like independent of each other and make the decision of whether or not they'll give you a pass on the past identity that you've had. So say when you're like 80 years old, is anyone really gonna be mad at you that you like killed someone? I don't know. But since it's like recent within the past like 10 years, I think it'd still be like a red flag. Maybe it's like, I don't know, maybe as time goes on and you're like 20 years like far from it, or like 30 years further from it, maybe people won't care as much. What constitutes as a recent action? Something that will, like an action that you should still be like responsible for, held responsible for. Let's talk about like the inappropriate conduct, sexual conduct, with like some Hollywood stars or whatever, like Hollywood producers towards different actors or like different characters. The whole Me Too movement is pretty based on that idea. It's like trying to hold people responsible for past actions, because it's really like, and rightfully so, it's moved the people that it affected in such a way that like they can't forget about it. It has like permanent damaging effects on individuals when you have interactions that are, you know, that are malicious, like sexual misconduct. 100% would be on someone's mind. The only reason people are sticking up is because there's a group of individuals who have been wrongfully done or wrongfully interacted with in a professional environment. So, would those recent actions be identifying of the character who conducted them? Depends on who wants to keep it recent and who doesn't want to keep it recent. Say it was like 60 years later, are people still going to remember like that someone wrongful? I think they would, but would you still want to hold someone responsible 60 years later after the event happened? I think people take a look at the Holocaust as like a recent event too. Or sometimes I think they also have like a distant event. The reason why they keep it recent, or rather, I think the reason why they still want to like hold Hitler accountable for what he did is because like, you know, it's unforgivable. It's like it's recent in the eyes of people who want to still see justice towards the person who did something wrong. That's like a recent action. It's like an action that should still be punishable. And in fact, I don't think he's been, like, people don't think he's been punished enough either up to this point. Alright, moving on. Problems with remembering your past and reminding yourself of your past identity. I've already talked about the personal struggle relating to this. And I've done some really stupid shit. I was like a fat fuck. I was a failure in college. I failed college pretty much. Socially, I'm pretty awful for the most part. or I was pretty awful for the most part. I felt like there was just like a huge downgrade in my character when I was like 19, 20. I was like a fat fuck until 22, 23. I guess I still am a fat fuck now that now that I think about it, but at least I've made changes since when I was 23, and now that I'm 25, I'm definitely much different. Actually, I would say the changes happened when I was 24. So it's been like over the past year, it's been a massive reshift of my physical identity, and I think my intellectual identity has been changing, or like my character identity as a whole has been changing since like I was 23. Different mindsets, different understandings, yeah, different perspectives. But remembering who I was like before I was 23 and 24 is just, I'm pretty uninspired by who I was willing to be at that time. But I think when you're reminded by those moments and those experiences, it's like, and you ask the question of, am I the same person who I was before? Or like, was I the same? Am I still the same piece of shit that I was before? And I think if you're willing to indulge yourself in the negative thinking that goes along with that, yeah. I mean, physically, like, you're still the same person, right? Like, you didn't move outside of your body to someone else. But boundarying yourself from that person who you were before is hard to do, especially when I mean, the obvious answer to the question is, are you different? Are you the same person from before? And the answer is yes. Literally. But also literally not. So I think, like, physically, doesn't every cell in your body like rotate to new cells like every 7 years? So biologically, like, maybe maybe not. I don't know. Spiritually, no. But it's like not hard to say that who you were before is who you are now, because you're a collection of the experiences from that past up to who you are now. But you have to put faith in the idea that your progression every day has moved you in a direction further, and yeah, further down the line of life experiences than who you were in the past. So distinguishing your identities from your past self and who you are today, I think that's a journey everyone needs to find for themselves. Think in the way that you want to separate yourself from who you were before, whether that's like forgetting your past self, or remembering your past self and knowing that, like, what you did before in the past is what you did before in the past, and you're in control of who you are today. And who you are in the future is, you have to put faith in who you will become, because the future self will make the decision that your future self will make decisions of the future. And I think having that faith in yourself is a good perspective to have. Every step of your, like, life journey has been handled in the right way by that self that you at the time were making decisions for. All right. So that's getting hung over your past. I think we're going to move on to who you want to be. And I think these last 4 points are more like, I had some idea of where I wanted to take these, but they ended up being really short because some of these kind of blend in with the concepts that were said in the past one. So, who you want to be, and the idea of that question in total is pretty much up to your choice. When someone asks you who you want to be, that's subjective to where you want to see or like who you want to be today. It's like, say if you ask that to like a 6-year old, who you want to be, sometimes they want to look at like their future self, or I don't know. It's hard to know. I think that's both like a present question and like a future question. So maybe that's the actual like accurate takeaway here. Who you want to be addresses the present and the future. When you're asked that question, the present you can be the best you that you want to be. When you're thinking of the future, you're thinking about where the trajectory of where you want to see yourself at a specific time, or not so much at a specific time. It's just not now, and it's in the future. And I would hope the identity that you come to with that answer is someone that you find inspiring, so inspiring for yourself that you'd want to live it. I think that's the idea of who you want to be. Who you can be is the next question. And this is like, this is slightly phrased a little bit different because it has, or this has a different meaning with the question, because who you can be may be like someone so distant that you don't expect yourself to achieve. Or it could be understanding the potential that you have, that you can become someone better than who you are. Someone so much better that you can't really identify with that person yet, other than you want to be them, and that your potential can make it there. You have faith that you can make it to that character, to that identity. So if I was asked that question of who I could be like a father. I could be someone responsible enough to be as great as my own father. I can be a software developer, an entrepreneur. I can be as many things as I would want to be. And that, like, all those answers are inspiring to me. Like, I'm so inspired by that character that I'd like to be that. Because, like, each of those roles are inspiring. Who you will be is the next question. And maybe this isn't so much a question in of itself, but I think internally you can ask this question, and it may not be toxic, or it might be toxic, but who you will be is like an expectation that you will achieve a certain identity, or that you will be a certain identity. And following the with the idea of identity is ever changing, this is pretty hard to do, because then you're just stagnant in your growth with your resolve with the character that you want to be. So instead, you're constant, like forcing yourself to be constant. And I think that's a wrong way to approach life. Whoever you want to be is who you want to be. And if you want to stay at a constant role, I don't think you're going to be, I don't think that leaves you with very much room to have control with the rest of your life. That's not even true. I think that's like an aspect that you should be able to control in your life. And I don't think not having that is going to do you any good. But yeah, as I said, there's the internal expectation that you can be that, or that you will be someone. And then there's an external expectation that you will be someone for them. And I think that's just a really toxic way to solidify yourself at a place that shouldn't be solidified. That is like ever changing. It shouldn't be something that's constant, is really all I'm going to say. The final thought for this podcast, as I said before, identity progression is ever changing all the time. Being able to move on from your past identity and having that boundary between keeping yourself responsible for recent actions, as well as also forgiving yourself or like moving yourself away, boundarying yourself from the person who you were in the past is like a key. It's like a key activity to partake in order to stay like healthy with your past self and your current self and your future self. And I think the best way, the best like perspective to have about progressing your identity is forgive who you were before and work on who you are now. I think that's the advice that I'd give someone else. You're in control of who you are today. And that goes for who you were in the past as well. You made decisions that in the past that were made in the past. So, and even if those weren't the right decisions, at least you have the experience of going through those. Who you are today, are the decisions that are presented to you today are what can be made today, and that's what you should be focusing on. Isabel writes, who you want to be in the future starts with the actions you take to become them today. It's important to keep in mind your future self won't magically come to life. You have to work to make it happen. Absolutely. In the best interest of your current self and your future self. The decisions you make today are the ones that are going to change you in the future. So make them so impactful that it puts you in a good spot in the future and for today. I think you'll find meaning from taking up that responsibility and making use of the responsibility of the opportunity. All right. I think that I actually covered most of what I wanted to say today. Wow, we're actually hitting the hour mark. Damn, almost on the dot. But yeah, Lon actually wanted to talk today about the same thing. Maybe we'll revisit this topic, and I'd actually like to hear like Isabel's thought. Actually, I'd honestly love to hear everyone's thoughts on what it means to be progressing your identity forward in a way that's meaningful to you, especially when people get hung up over their past. But alas, we are here at the end of the podcast. Thank you, Isabel, for sharing your thoughts. I'll see when we do a part 2 to this topic. I won't know how to generate this, like another outline for this. Maybe I'll like search something up. Or maybe I'll just have you guys like read over the list and then just like answer vocally what you guys are thinking. I don't know. I'll have to figure something out. Or figure something that's like meaningful out for everyone. Alon was just like on a trip today, so he's coming back. Anyhow, I'm gonna call it for today. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you guys next week. We'll have something planned.